The dressing room door at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach had Frank Sinatra's name on it in gold letters. Elvis Presley stood outside that door for 30 seconds, hand raised to knock, frozen. March 26, 1960. 6 weeks since he'd come home from Germany. 4 years since Sinatra had called rock and roll the most brutal, ugly, degenerate, vicious form of expression in print. Since he'd called Elvis specifically a threat to everything music was supposed to be. And now Elvis was here to perform on Sinatra's comeback special. For $125,000, more money than any guest had ever been paid for a television appearance. More money than Elvis's parents had made in 20 years combined. Colonel Parker stood beside him, impatient. "You gonna knock or just stare at the door all day?" Elvis knocked, 3 times. Firm but not aggressive. "Come in." Sinatra's voice. Clipped. New Jersey accent softened by Hollywood, but never erased. Elvis opened the door and stepped into a room that smelled like expensive cigarettes and even more expensive cologne. Frank Sinatra sat in a leather chair, legs crossed, smoking, watching Elvis with eyes that gave nothing away. He was 44. Elvis was 25. The gap between them wasn't just age. It was philosophy, style, 2 different Americas colliding in a Miami hotel room. Sinatra didn't stand up, didn't extend his hand, just nodded at the chair across from him. "Sit." Elvis sat. The air between them was thick enough to cut. Parker stayed by the door, watching, calculating angles the way he always did. Sinatra took a long drag from his cigarette, exhaled slowly. "So, you're the kid who killed my career." Elvis's stomach dropped. But something in Sinatra's eyes, a glint, maybe humor, maybe test, told him this was a moment that required careful navigation. "I didn't kill anything, Mr. Sinatra. I just sang what I felt." Sinatra studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, he smiled. Not warm, but not cold either. Something like respect, grudging and new. "Yeah, I guess you did." He stood up, extended his hand. "Welcome to the show, kid. Let's make some money." They shook, and in that handshake, brief, firm, weighted with history, 2 eras of American music acknowledged each other. Didn't merge, didn't agree, but acknowledged. What happened over the next 12 hours would change both their careers, and neither of them saw it coming. 4 years earlier, the war begins. October 1956. Elvis was everywhere. Television, radio, movie theaters. Teenage girls screaming, parents terrified. Frank Sinatra watched from Las Vegas, where his career was quietly dying, and felt something between rage and fear. He'd been the biggest thing in music for 15 years. Sinatra, the voice. Women fainted at his concerts in the 40s. Soldiers wrote home about him. He'd defined cool sophistication, what it meant to be a man who could break your heart with a whisper. And now this truck driver from Memphis was erasing all of it. Elvis didn't whisper. He shouted. He moved like he'd been struck by lightning. He took black music and country music and mixed them into something that made teenagers lose their minds and parents demand congressional hearings. In a magazine interview that October, a reporter asked Sinatra about rock and roll. "Rock and roll is the most brutal, ugly, degenerate, vicious form of expression. It's phony and false, and sung, written, and played for the most part by cretinous goons." The reporter pressed, "What about Elvis Presley specifically?" Sinatra's jaw tightened. "His kind of music is deplorable, a rancid-smelling aphrodisiac. It fosters almost totally negative and destructive reactions in young people." The quote went national. Elvis read it in his dressing room at the Louisiana hayride. His first thought was that Sinatra was probably right. He was destroying something. But his second thought was simpler. Then why are so many people listening? He didn't respond publicly. Didn't fight back. Just kept singing, kept moving, kept being Elvis. But the words stuck. 4 years later, standing in that Miami dressing room, they hung in the air like smoke. The offer nobody expected. December 1959. Elvis was in Germany, serving the last months of his army stint. Frank Sinatra was in Hollywood, trying to rebuild a career that had cratered in the mid-50s. He'd left Capitol Records. His movie roles had dried up. His Vegas shows weren't selling out anymore. But then he started his own record label, Reprise, and negotiated a deal with ABC for a television special. Welcome Home Elvis was the concept. Sinatra would host. Elvis would perform. Ratings gold. The old guard welcoming home the new king. When Colonel Parker got the call, his first instinct was to laugh. Sinatra hated Elvis. Everyone knew it. This had to be a setup. But the money was real. $125,000 for 12 minutes of performance. A record, unprecedented. And the publicity, Elvis returning from the army, Sinatra extending an olive branch, would be massive. Parker called Elvis in Germany. Sinatra wants you on his special. Silence on the other end. Then why? Money. Ratings. Maybe he's softened. Maybe he's desperate. Does it matter? Elvis thought about the quote from 1956. Deplorable. Rancid smelling. He thought about his mother, who died while he was in basic training. She'd loved Sinatra, played his records constantly. Now there's a real singer, she'd say. Not as a dig at Elvis, just as truth. Yeah, Elvis said finally. I'll do it. But when he hung up, he wondered if he'd just agreed to walk into a trap. March 26, 1960, rehearsal day. The Fontainebleau Hotel was chaos. Cameras, lighting rigs, dancers rehearsing, the Rat Pack lounging, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop, cracking jokes and radiating the kind of confidence that came from owning every room they walked into. Elvis arrived with his entourage at noon. Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana had flown in for the performance. Colonel Parker was already working the room, shaking hands, making deals. Nancy Sinatra, Frank's daughter, 20 years old, beautiful and nervous, was assigned to escort Elvis. She found him in the hallway, looking slightly lost. Mr. Presley, I'm Nancy. My father sent me to show you around. Elvis smiled. That crooked grin that made girls weak. Call me Elvis, and thank you. I feel like a fish out of water here. She laughed. You're the biggest star in the world. Not in this crowd. These people, your father, Sammy, all of them, they're real class. I'm just a kid who got lucky. Nancy studied him. The humility seemed genuine. Not an act, not false modesty. Just a 25-year-old who'd been famous since he was 21, and still didn't know how to carry it comfortably. My father's nervous too, she said quietly. Elvis looked surprised. Really? He'd never admitted. But having you here, it's a big deal. You're the future. He knows it. I'm not trying to replace him. Maybe not. But you already have. The words hung between them. Not cruel. Just honest. Nancy walked away, and Elvis stood there, realizing that this whole thing, the special, the money, the handshake, wasn't about reconciliation. It was about passing the torch, and Frank Sinatra was handing it over whether he wanted to or not. The rehearsal nobody talks about. At 3 p.m. they ran through the duet. The arrangement was clever. Elvis would sing one of Sinatra's hits. Sinatra would sing one of Elvis's. A symbolic trade. Each stepping into the other's world. Elvis got Witchcraft. Sinatra got Love Me Tender. The first run-through was awkward. Elvis tried to croon like Sinatra. Smooth, controlled, sophisticated. It didn't work. He sounded like an imitation, a kid playing dress-up. Sinatra stopped the band. Hold it, hold it. He walked over to Elvis, who tensed, expecting criticism. Kid, don't sing it like me. Sing it like you. Elvis blinked. But it's your song. And you're making it boring. I want to hear Elvis Presley sing Witchcraft, not some watered-down version of me. Give it your style. That's what people are paying for. Elvis nodded. Reset. This time, he sang it with more edge, more rhythm, more Elvis. It still wasn't rock and roll, but it was alive. Sinatra listened, arms crossed. When Elvis finished, he nodded. Better. Much better. Then it was Sinatra's turn. Love Me Tender. A ballad. Sweet. Gentle. Everything Sinatra should be good at. But when he sang it, something was off. The phrasing was perfect. The technique flawless. But it felt cold. Mechanical. Like he was singing a song he didn't believe in. Elvis watched from the side. And in that moment, he understood. Sinatra didn't get his music. Couldn't. The emotional language was too different. Sinatra sang from the head. Smart. Controlled. Precise. Elvis sang from the gut. Raw. Messy. Real. Neither was better. They were just different. And the gap between them was unbridgeable. Backstage, the conversation. An hour before showtime, Elvis found himself alone with Sinatra in the green room. The rest of the cast was doing final preparations. It was just the two of them, bourbon on the table between them. Tension that had softened, but never quite disappeared. Sinatra poured 2 glasses, slid one to Elvis. "You drink?" "Not much. But tonight?" "Yeah." They drank. Sinatra lit another cigarette. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why do you move like that? The hips, the legs?" Elvis considered the question. Nobody had asked him that directly before. "No. It just happens. When the music hits me, my body reacts. I can't stop it. Tried once in a rehearsal. Felt like I was suffocating." Sinatra nodded slowly. "I used to do something similar. Back in the 40s. Not the same, but women screamed, fainted, drove me crazy. I felt like a circus act." "How'd you stop?" "I didn't. It stopped on its own. You get older, the audience changes, the music shifts. One day you wake up and nobody's screaming anymore. They're just listening. It's quieter, but also lonelier." Elvis looked at him, saw something he hadn't expected. Vulnerability. Fear. Sinatra wasn't angry at Elvis for taking his crown. He was scared of being forgotten. "You're still the best at what you do," Elvis said. "Maybe. But what I do isn't what people want anymore. You're what they want. And when they're done with you, they'll move on to the next thing. That's the business. Nobody stays on top forever." "That's a depressing thought." Sinatra smiled, bitter, knowing. "Welcome to show business, kid." The performance, 10:15 p.m. The show was live, broadcast to millions. Elvis stood in the wings, watching Sinatra work the audience. Smooth. Effortless. The man could tell a joke, land a note, make you feel like you were in his living room all at once. Then Sinatra introduced him. "Ladies and gentlemen, he's just home from the army. And believe me, he's still got it. Mr. Elvis Presley." The applause was enormous. Elvis walked out, and for a second the two men stood side by side. The camera caught it, the old guard and the new king, acknowledging each other with nods that said everything and nothing. Elvis sang Witchcraft first. Took Sinatra's advice, sang it his way. The arrangement was swing, but Elvis added a slight edge, a rhythm that wasn't quite rock but wasn't quite traditional either. The audience loved it. Sinatra watched from the side, nodding, impressed despite himself. Then Sinatra sang Love Me Tender, still too perfect, still too controlled. But the audience didn't care. They were watching history, 2 icons sharing a stage, bridging a gap that was supposed to be unbridgeable. The duet came last. They sang Witchcraft together, trading verses, harmonizing on the chorus. It shouldn't have worked. Their voices were too different, their styles too opposed, but somehow it did. The contrast made both of them better. Sinatra's precision highlighted Elvis's raw energy. Elvis's passion made Sinatra's control more impressive. When the song ended, they shook hands on stage. The applause went on for 2 minutes. Cameras flashed. The moment crystallized. Not friendship, exactly, but mutual respect, acknowledgement, that they were both necessary, both important, both part of the same story even if they told it differently. Backstage, Sinatra found Elvis in the green room, poured 2 more bourbons, raised his glass. "To the future. May it be kinder to you than it was to me." Elvis clinked glasses. "And to the past. For teaching me what not to do." They drank, didn't become friends, didn't need to, but the war was over, and both of them had survived. The aftermath nobody expected. Welcome Home Elvis got massive ratings. Biggest television audience of the year. The reviews were mixed. Some critics loved the generational handoff. Others thought it was a cynical publicity stunt. But something unexpected happened. Both Elvis and Sinatra saw career boosts. Elvis proved he could be sophisticated, could work in formats beyond rock and roll. Sinatra proved he was still relevant, still able to command a stage and an audience. Within a year, Sinatra's Reprise Records was thriving. His movies were hits again. He wasn't the biggest star anymore, but he'd found a sustainable second act. Elvis went to Hollywood, made movies, kept singing, kept moving. But that night in Miami stuck with him. Sinatra's warning, nobody stays on top forever. 10 years later, in 1970, Elvis was in Vegas, bloated and tired, performing twice a night for tourists. Sinatra came to see him backstage after a show. They hadn't spoken in years. "We look like hell, kid." Elvis laughed, tired, empty. "Yeah, I feel worse." Sinatra sat down. "I told you, the business eats you alive if you let it." "I remember." "You gonna let it?" Elvis didn't answer. Couldn't. Because he didn't know. The pills kept him going. The Colonel kept booking shows. The audience kept screaming. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, Elvis Presley had gotten lost. Sinatra stood up, patted his shoulder. "Find a way out, kid, while you still can." He left. Elvis never saw him again. 7 years later, Elvis was dead at 42. Sinatra sang at benefits in his memory, told reporters he'd been a good kid, never mentioned the warning he'd given that night in Vegas. But the warning had been real, and Elvis, for all his talent, had never figured out how to heed it. What March 26, 1960 really meant. The Sinatra special wasn't about music. It was about power. Who had it? Who was losing it? How the transfer happened. Sinatra understood that. Understood he was handing over the keys to the kingdom, and the best he could do was make it look graceful, make it seem like a choice instead of an inevitability. Elvis understood it too. Understood that he was being coronated, but also that coronations were traps. Once you were the king, everyone wanted to dethrone you, and nobody, not Sinatra, not anyone, could tell you how to keep the crown. For one night, they stood together, sang together, acknowledged each other. Then they went their separate ways, each carrying the weight of what it meant to be at the top, and each knowing that the view from up there was lonelier than anyone ever admitted. The quote, "Nobody remembers." Years later, in an interview 6 months before Elvis died, a reporter asked him about Sinatra, about the special, about whether they'd ever really reconciled. Elvis thought for a long time. Then said, "Frank told me once that nobody stays on top forever. I didn't believe him, thought I'd be different. Turns out I was just another guy who got famous too young and didn't know what to do with it. Frank survived it. I'm not sure I will." 3 months later, Elvis was found dead in his bathroom at Graceland. Sinatra, upon hearing the news, poured a glass of bourbon and raised it to the empty room. "You were right, kid. You weren't different. None of us are." He drank alone. And somewhere in that silence, 2 eras ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet clink of a glass against a table, and the memory of a handshake that had meant everything and nothing at all. 2 final lines. They say you should never meet your heroes. But sometimes you have to learn they're just people, scared and human, fighting the same battles you are. Elvis met his hero, shook his hand, and learned that winning meant nothing if you didn't know when to walk away. Visual prompt B/W 4K. No text. Ultra-realistic 4K black and white photograph of Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley shaking hands on a television stage. Sinatra in impeccable tuxedo, Elvis in dress uniform fresh from army service. Both men's expressions show mixture of respect and wariness. Vintage 1960 TV cameras and studio lights, visible in background. Their clasped hands centered in composition, slight tension visible in their shoulders. Fontainebleau Hotel Miami Beach stage setting. Dramatic theatrical lighting creating strong shadows. Moment captures generational power transfer. Photorealistic 1960s live television. Aesthetic with visible grain. No text. Cinematic framing emphasizing historical significance of the handshake. Professional studio photography style.